r/AskReddit by LaughWithMEmes. Have you ever encountered true evil? How? My kids went to visit their mom in the UK on a court-ordered visit. I knew what was going to happen, but couldn't prevent the visit. Sure enough, rather than put them on a plane back to me in the USA, she went on the run with them and her boyfriend. I got a lot of help from the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the US State Department, and the Scottish government paid all my legal fees over there. During the 5 months she had the kids, she tried to brainwash them. She told them, if they came back to me, I would allow them to be molested and kill them. This was relentless. My son was incredibly strong and refused to believe her or cooperate. They were 13 at the time, but my daughter was much easier to manipulate. I really don't know for certain that they weren't physically abused, but a lot of the stuff she accused me of was things she and her then boyfriend, now husband, did to the children. I had to fly to Scotland to appear in a trial. I walked out of the courthouse at 9 PM on a Friday night with the children. Normal process for these cases is to have a designated handover 2 or 3 days later, but the child psychologist who interviewed us all was positive that my ex-wife would kill the children, and the judge agreed. I got them back in the clothes they stood in. I have no doubt she would indeed have killed them, rather than hand them over to me. 5 years later, she has no contact with the children, their choice. They have anxiety and depression, but are doing remarkably well. They are high school seniors now, and they make me proud every day. About 10 years ago I was walking in the city when I saw a motorcade of police stop in front of the courthouse. Tall, classy guy in handcuffs comes out, escorted by police. Gives me a wink and a smile. Confident. I thought it was just some other finance mogul who took it too far. Saw him in the news a week later. Guy stabbed and killed his 2 young children in a bathtub to get back at this cheating ex. There was a kid in my 6th grade class who loved designing his own custom shanks and then stabbing people in the arm or back with them. He had a look of pure joy on his face when he saw that he drew blood and caused suffering to another human. He was only suspended for a week the first 2 times he did this, before they finally kicked him out of school after the 3rd time. How did this kid not get the shit beaten out of him? I get that he's shank kid, but did no one he stabbed have any friends? Exactly what I was thinking. The kids I went to school with would have jumped him, at least once. Back in 2011 my uncle down in Mexico had got kidnapped by one of the cartels. They gave my entire family on my dad's side a random $10,000 and we would get him back. My dad called in people who owed him money and managed to get the 10 grams. He sent it down to the family down south and they paid the ransom for my uncle. All we got in return was my uncle's lifeless body. Unfortunately this is how most cartel kidnappings have ended up. Larry Pollock, an American citizen living in Mexico, got kidnapped by a cartel and what he basically had to say is that by day they are police officers and by night they are criminals, and the only reason he survived is because he managed to escape because he saw other bodies. I felt like my aunt was pretty evil and she was a kindergarten teacher no less. She pulled my arm out of its socket one time when I was 4 and she was helping me cross the road. I visited her when I was 16 and every opportunity she got she would whisper in my ear, "You are worthless. You are nothing, and just keep walking." The visit ended with her trying to strangle me after I took issue with her trying to force feed my brother Ginger, and that was the last time my family spoke to her. I remember fantasizing about getting back at her in some way for a while, but then moved on with my life and grew up. Years later, she was being her typical self with my uncle, her brother, and berating him, calling him worthless, and he shot her in the head, killing her. It was a real tragedy for the family as he shot himself afterwards as well, but I certainly have not missed my aunt. I've told this story before, about meeting a murderer. Was a journalist on weekend duty. Got called out to a story. Guy claims his car was hijacked with his 2-year-old son in it. I met him at the police station. He seemed devastated. I was devastated. I mean, I'd done plenty of grisly crime stories, but a missing kid is next level awful. Next day I had my day off. The regular crime reporter called me. They'd arrested the dad and found the little boy's body at a rubbish dump. He did it out of revenge for his wife cheating. It still bothers me to this day how I could have felt so much sympathy for this man. I shook his hand. I cried with him. I'm usually very good at picking up when someone is off. Just goes to show you, true evil disguises itself very well. The biggest psychopath I ever met was an extremely likable, charismatic guy. Seemed genuinely nice when you talked to him. You could only tell he was a psychopath by his actions. The dude destroyed everything he touched. Would relentlessly steal from people. I don't think he was particularly violent, as far as I know, but he had no scruples about taking advantage of other people's kindness to get what he wanted, kindness which was never in short supply for him, since everyone liked him so much, until they found themselves living with him for a while, which was often because he was essentially homeless and schmozzed his way into sleeping on other people's couches. The point is, you won't always know if there's something off about someone. Last I heard, he was being a sugar baby. He's straight BTW for an old lonely rich gay guy. I work with a guy in Ontario who was always posting on Facebook that he just adopted new puppy like every 4 or 5 months. He adopted them from all different shelters and people. Had to have about 8 or 9 at one point. We went to his house for some reason and there were no dogs. No signs of dogs, no toys, no food bowls, etc. We asked about the puppies and he just offhandedly pointed to the backyard, which we noticed was full of little mounds, and said they all were sick and died. Guess he just didn't have good luck with animals. The way he said it was cold. The CSPCA investigated him and tested the remains. He was putting small amounts of his own homemade poison in the dog food and conducting his own little LD50 test. I don't know about true evil, but my stepfather-in-law is a truly horrible person. My husband was diagnosed as autistic quite young. Stepfather said it was BS and just beat the shit out of him. Just beatings would have been one thing, but he got downright petty. He would purposely figure out the foods he had sensory issues with and cook only those foods. That turned into their entire menu. He claimed that they were his favorite foods, but this favoritism only occurred after he realized my husband didn't like them. He also would go out of his way to make sure my husband didn't get things he wanted, even if it meant eating more cake, so my husband had less. When my husband's teacher suggested special education, he refused and just beat him more to try to get him to have good grades. All bruises were easily explained because my husband liked skateboarding. He was determined that autism was just bullshit and that it was nothing a good whooping couldn't fix. The final blow, the truly shitty thing, was the birth of his son. When my husband was in his late teens, his mother and stepfather had a baby. The baby was diagnosed as autistic. He is one of those awesome parents now and fully advocates for autism awareness. He still refuses to acknowledge his stepson's autism and just ignores it. My husband has. I've wrote about it before, so I copied and pasted. My husband's little sister was 9 and he was 12. He also had 2 girl cousins close in age as well. His uncle raped and killed his sister after killing his aunt. That night when my husband went to the bathroom, he didn't shut the door all the way and the uncle was watching him through the crack. Turns out his sister was folded and put into the bathroom cabinet, and had my husband walked to the back of the bathroom, the uncle would have killed him as well. The uncle went on the run that night, and the next day my husband and his cousins were playing hide and seek and my husband ended up pulling his aunt with her head 3/4 of the way off up from behind a futon. She was wrapped in a carpet. My husband is doing pretty well now. He obviously has PTSD, but he is a great dad, a little overprotective but that's understandable, and a great husband to me. He is a hard worker and super loving. He has had a miserable life up until we got together 16 years ago. But he really is amazing. He loves with all of his heart. I really am a lucky woman to have a guy like him with the heart he has. A few years ago, a friend of mine was going through a nasty divorce. Like really bad. He came to visit me one evening as I was getting off of work. When I sat down with him, he just seemed off, like a completely different person than the man I had known before. Blank stare in his eyes, no smiling, anger behind everything he said. I chalked it up to the divorce and just thought to myself that he would get better when everything calmed down. I told my wife when I got home about seeing him and she agreed with my assessment. I bumped into his ex-wife and some friends a few days later at another work event. She was actually out celebrating their divorce being finalized, I think, and she invited my wife and I over to a house party. That would be the last time I saw her. My wife and I ended up not going to the house party, but the ex-husband did show up. He killed 9 people, including his ex-wife. Edit, this couple had been known for throwing parties prior to their divorce. That stopped when they began divorce proceedings, of course. The party was not a celebration of their divorce. It was a Dallas Cowboys watch party and it was her attempt and trying to do something she saw as normal after such a difficult time. I also believe this is why he focused on that. In Iraq there was a family that we would go see every other week or so while on patrol. We would ask them how things are going and if there was anything they needed us to do. They were a respected family in the area and did a lot to build their community to defend against the violence committed by the insurgency. It was a big family, lots of kids, 3 wives. They were good people just trying to better their community. Their house just happened to be one road that was kind of a border between Al-Qaeda controlled territory and coalition controlled territory. One day we were patrolling the road as we didn't several times per week. And we came across a hole that had been blown into the road, making it impassable by vehicle. We turned around and got back onto the road a few miles further down and encountered another hole just like the first. The holes were about 2 miles apart and effective created a corridor for Al-Qaeda fighters to cross the road more freely. We dismounted to get to the family's house. Everyone was on edge. Once we arrived at the house it was immediately noticeable that something was wrong. It was silent and there was a smell surrounding the house. Inside was the most terrible thing I have ever seen. The entire family was gathered into the central room of the house where they were all tortured, raped, and murdered. There was maybe a ½ inch of blood that was congealing on the floor. If you looked at the scene you could tell the order that it all happened. The father was killed last, the daughters were unclothed and laying face down, the mother and baby were killed with 1 bullet at the same time. By the time we had arrived they had all been dead for 2 or 3 days already. I think about this every day and I've had to stop to cry 3 times just to write it out. Edit. I just want to thank this community for its support. The amount of positive feedback has been pretty incredible. I do not want to perpetuate the "broken veteran" stereotype. While this is one of several painful memories that I carry with me, I have so many more of seeing the compassion that humans are capable of as well. Yes, there was a time that I struggled, and I struggled a lot, just as others have, but I have sought help, and today I'm doing well. Please like and subscribe for more. This is Laugh with Memes. Goodbye.